The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 24th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. On the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves, and then he went home, amazed at what had happened. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Beloved of God, grace to you and peace from the one who created us, redeemed us, and moves among us still. Amen. So each year on the Tuesday of Holy Week, which was last week, Lutheran pastors and deacons who serve here in the metropolitan Chicago area gather together with our bishop for a special worship that's called the Chrism Mass. Chrism is the liturgical word for the kind of oil that we use to anoint the foreheads of people who are baptized, like Sydney Barrett will be at 11 o'clock this morning, and also the oil that we use to anoint the foreheads of people who are near the end of life. And Holy Week is an exceptionally busy one for people who work in the church. And so I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I had never made it a priority to attend the Chrism Mass. But the one that happened last Tuesday was held in my husband's church, where he serves as the lead pastor in Naperville, so it was kind of obligatory that I show up. And I know it can be hard for some of you also to get your butts into worship when you maybe don't feel like it, or when you think things are a little too busy. Guess what? You're in good company, because me too. But God showed up anyway in that service last week, even in spite of myself. God showed up as the bishop blessed that oil, which, as I said, our churches across the metro area will use in the ministries of healing and baptism. God showed up as we renewed the hopeful and solemn promises that we make as pastors when we are ordained. God showed up in the words of our bishop, who preached a really powerful sermon reminding us that there is no path that we walk that Christ hasn't first walked before us. God showed up in the sheer number of colleagues, actually, who came to worship, which was a sign and a reminder to me of just how much we all need each other in these days. But mostly, God showed up, as God so often does, in a toddler. One of our colleagues had brought her little daughter along to worship, and as soon as the bishop had finished proclaiming the final blessing, this tiny little voice echoed out clear and strong from the very back of the sanctuary, "Yay!" It was the best Easter sermon perhaps ever preached in the history of the church. And I think that baby girl's yay is basically a modern linguistic interpretation of the Alleluias that we shout together this morning. And her brilliant one-word sermon could not have come at a better time, for me anyway, because honestly, I have needed a little bit of help accessing the yays and the alleluias of Easter hope that we gather to proclaim today. I said to Pastor Eric, actually just a few days ago, that I wasn't sure how I was going to preach an Easter sermon today because my heart is just so troubled. My heart is troubled over so many things, but I think mostly by how quickly and easily we allow ourselves to see other humans as expendable, as threats, as nothing more than inconvenient obstacles in paths toward personal gain or revenge or absolute power over other people. And the scriptures call us over and over directly and unequivocally to love the poor and the immigrant and the outcast and the vulnerable, and to love them not just with our words, but with our actions. I am breathless, actually, with grief and with rage over what is happening in our country and over the material impact it's having on the world's most downtrodden and on our fragile planet and on folks who are part of this congregation. And honestly, I'm scared. What's happening right now, I think, is not normal, and it has gone so far beyond what we might have once blithely sort of categorized as like liberal or conservative. It's not about that. And I know because of the volume of calls and text messages that I have received from you, beloved Grace members, over the last couple of months, that you are feeling it too, weight upon weight, added on to the more personal worries and wounds and tender aches that we all also carry into this space today. My heart mostly feels more aligned with the psalmist's cry of "How long, O Lord?" than it does with that sweet toddler's "Yay!" And I think the same had to have been true for the hidden away disciples in the days after Jesus was crucified. Luke's gospel is short on details about where exactly the disciples were and what exactly they were doing, but John's gospel tells us that they were locked away in fear. Some really powerful people had just arrested and then executed their closest friend and their teacher. Jesus' apparent crime involved loving and serving and befriending and advocating for those on the margins and inspiring the courage in other people to do the same. Jesus' message and his ministry had changed too many lives and captivated too many people, and those really powerful people decided to make an example of him before they lost all control. So of course, the disciples were hidden away in fear. They were targets too. And I imagine them together but apart in the way that we sometimes organize ourselves, even in modern life, in the same locked room, each maybe huddled over their phones, refreshing their news feed every few minutes to see what new distressing thing was gonna, unfold now, with their anxiety rising with every new update, along with maybe their sense of isolation and their sense of powerlessness. And when Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women come to tell them that the tomb where Jesus' body had been laid was empty because he had been raised, I don't blame the disciples at all for calling it an idle tale, though I do blame the biblical translators for such a milquetoast phrase, because what the Greek word leiros actually means is a load of crap. Truly, hope is so unbelievable in the face of their reality that the disciples literally call the women's testimony BS. How about us? How about you? What do you call the women's testimony? I am so deeply intrigued by these women who were no less grief-stricken and afraid than the other disciples, but whose response to it is somehow profoundly different. Rather than locking themselves away in fear, they get up on the morning of the third day, stumbling around in half light, and make their way to the tomb. And let us be clear that these women were not shouting "yay" as they walked. Confusion and terror are the reigning emotions in this story, not expectation, and certainly not joy. The women are going to anoint Jesus' broken body, and they do not expect to find anything other than death when they arrive. But when they get there, something is terribly amiss. The stone has been rolled away from the front of the tomb, and they don't know how that happened. Jesus' body is gone, and they don't know what happened to that either. They fall on the ground in fear when two men in dazzling clothes show up. "Why do you look for the living among the dead?" they ask the women. "He is not here. He is risen. Remember how he told you." The women help each other remember, and so do we. Whether in your heart of hearts You believe the women's testimony to be nothing more than a quaint story, or maybe full-on BS, or whether it feels like an impossible affront to your rational mind, or whether you believe it is the promise of life itself. Your presence here today is key to our collective remembering, because faith is not ever and never has been something that we conjure up on our own. Faith takes the defiant commitment of the women at the tomb in conversation with the incredulous disciples and with every subsequent generation of the curious and the skeptics and the hopeful, reminding each other that love is, in fact, stronger than death. And so together, we remember. Week after week after week, we come here together and we remember. We remember, along with the author Rachel Held Evans, that the crucifixion of Jesus exposed the empire and all forms of unjust authority for what they are: cruel and empty, desperate and weak. We remember that not even Rome could bury Jesus, that not even Caesar could keep him dead for long. We remember that God desires our wholeness and our flourishing and will stop at literally nothing to free us from everything that binds us. We remember with the prophet Isaiah that one day in the new creation, no more shall the sound of weeping be heard, or the cries of distress. We remember that God's love for us is so vast and so tender and so powerful that nothing we have ever done or left undone is beyond its reach. And we remember that the new life that God so longs for us is in fact possible and awaits us with each new day, even and perhaps especially when we're stumbling around in half-light, confusion and terror, mostly the feelings that we're feeling. Imagine if you believed this. Imagine if you lived every day of your life as though this were true. How would it change your life? How would it change the world? The tomb is empty, beloveds. The world-altering power of love has been unleashed in the world through the resurrection of Jesus, and now through us. Already, right now, it is settling itself anew over migrants and refugees in ICE detention centers and Salvadoran prisons, over war-torn Gaza and battle-weary Ukraine, over parklands and forests and vulnerable ocean ecosystems, over the White House and our government buildings and our courthouses and the streets in which people gather, over cancer patients and addicts and the chronically unhoused, over our workplaces and our job hunts and our dinner tables and our schools, and over our worried parents and anxious teens and the ones who are so lonely it hurts. Already, friends, the power of resurrection is at work within us and around us, transforming a people and a creation yearning for wholeness, yearning to be made new. Hold on to that promise today, church, and every day as you leave this place, help each other remember when you falter or when you forget. Let it rise up in you as defiant hope and pour out from you as radiant joy, clear and strong, like the confident cry that toddler I met shouted from the back of the sanctuary. Will you shout it with me now? I'm serious. Let me hear your yay. Ready? Yay! Amen and amen.